There's a specific type of drug video that gets made about 1,000 times a year. You already know the one. The same drugs, the same stories, the same shocked face thumbnail. And honestly, if you've watched one of them, you've pretty much watched all of them already. So this video is genuinely different. We're going so deep into the drug iceberg that even the most terminally online, chronically researching, forum-dwelling psychonauts haven't heard of most of this. Some of these compounds have trip reports you can count on one hand. Some have exactly zero. This list escalates. You've been warned. DIPT. No, not the tip. The full name is N-N-disopropyltryptamine. And before you glaze over at the chemistry gobbledygook, just know this. DIPT is one of the only drugs on Earth specifically designed entirely by accident to ruin music. Permanently. That's its whole thing. Here's the background. DIPT is a tryptamine, which puts it in the same chemical family as DMT and psilocybin. It was first synthesized by the legendary chemist Alexander Shulgin, the guy who basically spent his entire career in a backyard lab making new drugs and then testing them on himself and his wife, which is honestly either the most insane or the most dedicated research methodology in the history of science. In his book Tikal, Shulgin documented his experience with DDIPT and immediately flagged something strange. Unlike every other psychedelic he'd ever tried, DIPT barely produced any visuals at all. No fractals, no walls breathing, no ego dissolution. Instead, it did something very specific to sound, something deeply wrong. In non-nerd terms, DIPT hijacks your auditory cortex and drops every pitch it processes down by several semitones. Music, voices, ambient noise. All of it gets shifted into a lower, distorted register that your brain can't reconcile with what it knows things should sound like. Imagine sitting down at a piano and every single key sounds like it belongs to a completely different, uglier instrument. That's DIPT. It is not a music-enhancing drug. It is a music-destroying drug. And somehow, inexplicably, people have voluntarily taken this. According to Shulgin's own notes, at higher doses, the auditory distortion becomes genuinely alarming. Voices start to sound robotic, mechanical, almost subhuman. He described one experience where his wife spoke to him and her voice had dropped so far it sounded like something being played through a broken tape recorder running at half speed. In the broader psychonaut community, one user on Arrowid described the experience this way. I put on my favorite album and within minutes I had to turn it off. Everything I loved about the music was gone. What was left sounded like a chorus of malfunctioning robots. He went on to say the worst part wasn't the trip itself, but the 2 hours after, when the distortion was slowly fading and his brain couldn't decide whether what he was hearing was real or still broken. Another user simply wrote, "Do not listen to anything you care about while on this drug. I'm serious." Now, here's the kicker. For most people, the auditory distortion fades when the trip ends, for most people. There are documented cases of DIPT causing persistent auditory changes that lasted weeks after a single dose. Some users reported music never sounded fully right again. So if you thought DIPT sounded like a harmless party trick, just know the price of admission might be permanently breaking the part of your brain that enjoys music. Not a great trade. And look, by the standards of this list, DIPT is basically the warm-up act. It won't kill you. It won't destroy your dopamine system or your liver or turn your skin into something that belongs in a horror movie. It's just going to reach into your brain and quietly snap the wire that connects you to music, which, if you love music, might actually be worse than most of the things we're about to cover. Anyway, we're just getting started. Pemeline, or as I prefer to call it, the drug the FDA banned because it was quietly destroying people's livers, and then kept circulating on the research chemical market anyway, because the research chemical market has exactly zero respect for the FDA. Pemmoline was developed in the 1970s as a mild stimulant, broadly similar in effect to Ritalin, improved focus, increased wakefulness, mild mood elevation. On paper, it looked reasonable. Doctors prescribed it for ADHD for years. The problem, which started surfacing slowly and then all at once, was that a meaningful number of patients were developing acute liver failure. Not liver damage. Liver failure. The kind that needs a transplant. The kind that kills you. The FDA officially pulled Pemmoline from the U.S. market in 2005, after the risk became impossible to ignore. Case closed. Right? Wrong. Because once a compound exists, it exists. The synthesis is documented. And in the research chemical community, Pemmoline quietly staged a comeback among people who either didn't know the history or knew it, and decided the cognitive boost was worth the gamble, which, for the record, is one of the most aggressively unhinged risk-reward calculations I've ever encountered. What makes Pemmoline particularly sinister compared to something like a bad psychedelic trip is that the liver damage it causes is completely invisible. You don't feel it happening. There are no warning signs. Users have reported taking Pemmoline for weeks and feeling completely fine, productive even, right up until their blood work came back with liver enzymes so elevated that their doctors assumed they had a serious drinking problem. One user on a research chemical forum wrote, and I'm paraphrasing because the full post involves a lot of lab results, that he had been using Pemmoline for cognitive enhancement for about 6 weeks before a routine checkup revealed damage significant enough that his doctor told him he'd been playing Russian roulette without knowing the gun was loaded. The genuinely terrifying part isn't just the liver failure risk on its own. It's that Pemmoline, for a significant period, was perfectly legal to order from overseas vendors. No prescription, no age verification required, just a credit card and a valid mailing address. And because it found its audience in the nootropic community, the productivity-obsessed corner of the internet where people treat their brains like machines that need optimization, most of its users had no idea they were quietly feeding their liver into a wood chipper. The typical Pemmoline user wasn't hunting for a high. They were a college student trying to survive finals, or a programmer burning through a deadline, or a remote worker trying to extract one more productive hour from their day. People who had never heard of the FDA ban. People who never thought to look. And even if you had looked, the vendors selling it online often listed it under different names, marketing it as a basic productivity supplement. And that's still just the opening chapter of what Pemmoline is actually capable of doing to your body. So here's what makes Pemmoline genuinely different from your standard dangerous drug story. Most substances that will hurt you at least have the decency to send a signal. Pain, nausea, a racing heart, some obvious physical alarm that your body is staging a protest. Pemmoline doesn't do that. Your liver can be an active, progressive failure while you're sitting at your desk feeling sharp, focused, and mildly pleased with yourself. Imagine being the guy who woke up early, optimized his morning routine, and took a nootropic he found recommended in a forum thread, only to end up in an emergency transplant evaluation because his liver quietly gave out. That's not a hypothetical. That is a documented pattern of events that played out for real people who just wanted to work a little harder. One particularly grim case involved a software developer in his early 30s who had been using Pemmoline for roughly 8 weeks when he went in for a routine annual physical. His liver enzymes came back so elevated that his doctor initially assumed he must be a serious drinker. He wasn't. He had found Pemmoline on a nootropic subreddit where it was discussed in the same casual, cheerful tone as caffeine and fish oil. Within a week of his blood work results, he was in specialist care. He later posted on the same forum that had recommended it to him. I genuinely thought I was being smart about this. I researched it. I read all the threads. Nobody mentioned the liver thing. Nobody mentioned the liver thing. And that's really the thesis statement for everything that follows on this list. The drugs that kill you loudly, dramatically, in ways that end up on the evening news and in congressional hearings, those are the ones people have been warned about since middle school. The drugs that kill you quietly, while you feel fine, while you feel good, while you feel like you found some secret edge nobody else knows about. Those are the ones that actually get people. They get people precisely because nobody is warning about them. And Pemeline is a textbook example of the second category. It ended up with exactly 0 pop culture infamy and a handful of destroyed livers. Bromo Dragon Fly. Yes, that is genuinely what it's called. And I'm not going to make a single joke about the name because, honestly, the name is the absolute least alarming thing about this compound. What is alarming? Alarming in the way that a slow-motion car crash is alarming, is that Bromo Dragon Fly is one of the only research chemicals with a documented, verified, not up for debate body count, at doses that experienced psychonauts might consider moderate. Here's the background. Bromo Dragon Fly is a phenethylamine, which puts it in the same extended chemical family as mescaline. It was first synthesized in 1998 by a researcher named Matthew Parker, who was studying serotonin receptor activity. The compound was never intended for human consumption. It was a laboratory tool, a precision instrument for probing how biological systems respond to certain chemical structures. It was not meant to be inhaled, swallowed, or injected by anyone at any point ever. The chemistry community published the work, filed it away, and moved on. Then around 2001, the structure leaked into the psychonaut underground, and someone decided to try it, which is, historically speaking, exactly how the worst chapters in drug history always begin. In non-nerd terms, Bromo Dragon Fly works by hammering your serotonin receptors with an intensity that most psychedelics can't come close to. At low doses, the effects sound almost reasonable. Mild visuals, a body high, something vaguely reminiscent of a soft LSD experience. That is the trap. Because the margin between a low dose and a dangerous dose on this compound is measured in micrograms, not milligrams. Micrograms. We are talking about quantities that are functionally invisible to the naked eye. A dose that gives you a mellow afternoon and a dose that sends you into a cardiovascular emergency are separated by an amount of powder you could lose by sneezing near it. And then there's the duration. This is where Bromo Dragon Fly stops being a cautionary tale and starts being something closer to a nightmare. A standard experience on this compound lasts between 2 and 3 days, not hours, full days. There is no early exit option. If you miscalculate the dose, and given the margin we're talking about, miscalculating is essentially a coin flip. You are locked into whatever is coming for the next 72 hours minimum. During that window, the compound causes severe vasoconstriction, which, in plain language, means it tightens your blood vessels to the point where circulation to your extremities can be cut off entirely. In documented overdose cases, this has caused gangrene. Users have lost fingers. One case from Scandinavia involved a man who lost part of his foot, not to infection. The tissue simply died because Bromo Dragon Fly strangled the blood supply long enough that there was nothing left to save. Even within the most extreme corners of the research chemical community, forums where people casually discuss compounds that would make a toxicologist's hair go white, Bromo Dragon Fly is treated as genuinely untouchable. This is not a compound that gets the usual harm reduction treatment of suggested doses and safety protocols. A moderator on one of the major harm reduction boards wrote a pinned post years ago that simply read, "There is no responsible dose of this. There is no context in which the risk is acceptable." If someone offers you this, walk away without discussing it. That post is still there. Nobody has taken it down. Nobody has argued with it. The deaths connected to this compound are not disputed. In 2009, 2 people in Sweden died after consuming tablets that had been mislabeled as a different substance entirely. They had no idea what they were taking. A third person from the same contaminated batch survived, but spent weeks in intensive care afterward. He later gave a statement to investigators describing the experience as feeling like dying in a body that refused to let him go unconscious. Fully aware, fully awake, unable to sleep, unable to stop the trip, unable to do anything except endure it. His words, translated from the original Swedish, "I understood what was happening. I knew something was very wrong. I could not stop it, and I could not sleep, and I could not leave." I want to be clear about something, and I'm going to drop the bit for a second to say it. Most of the compounds we cover in this series are genuinely scary in ways that are easy to sensationalize. But Bromo Dragonfly is different. The man in that Swedish case was a real person. The two people who didn't survive were real people. This wasn't a story that happened in a forum thread or a Reddit post that may or may not be embellished. It is documented medical and legal record. And the reason it deserves to be on this list, the reason it deserves to be near the top of this list, is that it keeps circulating. Quietly, mislabeled, misrepresented, showing up in drug markets as something else entirely. Waiting for the next person who doesn't know what they're holding. That's not a hypothetical future risk. That is what has already happened more than once. Anyway, that's enough of the serious voice. Let's bring it home. Galantamine. And before you click away because that sounds like something your grandmother takes, it kind of is. Galantamine is an FDA-approved medication used to treat Alzheimer's disease. It boosts acetylcholine in your brain, which helps with memory, focus, and wakefulness. Very normal. Very boring. Your doctor has probably prescribed it to someone's grandparent this week without thinking twice. But the reason it's closing out this video, a video that started with a drug that makes music sound broken and passed through one that quietly destroys your liver, and another that has amputated people's limbs, is that a specific corner of the internet figured out something about galantamine that has absolutely nothing to do with Alzheimer's and everything to do with making your dreams feel like a completely different universe. A better one. Here's the trick. Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter most responsible for REM sleep, the phase of sleep where dreams happen. So if you boost acetylcholine artificially while you're already in a REM cycle, your brain essentially turbocharges the dream state from the inside. It makes you more aware inside the dream, more present, more capable of realizing that what you're experiencing isn't real, which is the gateway to being able to control it. In non-nerd terms, galantamine is a legal, over-the-counter in some countries cheat code for lucid dreaming, and the people who use it for this purpose report results that sound like they're making it up. Dreams so vivid they describe them as more real than waking life, colors that are more saturated than anything they've seen with open eyes, music they compose inside the dream that they say sounds better and more complex than anything they've encountered in reality. The method that gets discussed most in these communities is actually pretty specific. You sleep for about 4 to 6 hours first, set an alarm, wake up briefly, take a low dose of galantamine, typically 4 to 8 milligrams, and then go back to sleep before it fully kicks in. Because the compound needs time to work its way across your blood-brain barrier, this timing window puts the galantamine's peak effect right in the middle of your next REM cycle. And when it hits, users describe it as the cognitive equivalent of someone turning the brightness all the way up on a screen you didn't know was dimmed. One user on a lucid dreaming forum wrote that they spent what felt like 2 full hours flying over a city they had built entirely from imagination, touching textures, smelling things, having conversations with characters who felt like real people, only to wake up and check the clock and find 30 minutes had passed. Another described meditating inside a dream, and said the state of awareness they achieved there was deeper than anything they had ever managed while awake. A recurring conclusion in these reports is that people describe it as a mode of consciousness they didn't know existed. Not a high, not a hallucination, something that felt more like an upgrade to the operating system. And here's the most surprising part. Galantamine for lucid dreaming has actually been studied. A clinical study concluded that participants who took galantamine during a specific sleep window were significantly more likely to achieve a lucid dream than those who didn't. That's not forum mythology. That is peer-reviewed data on an Alzheimer's drug. I genuinely don't know what to call these people. They're not psychonauts. They're not chasing a high. They're somewhere between amateur neuroscientists and the world's most dedicated sleepers. And they're doing it with a compound you could theoretically pick up at a pharmacy in certain countries without a prescription, which, for a list that started with DIPT destroying your relationship with music and passed through Pemeline quietly poisoning your liver, is genuinely the most unexpected place to land. And honestly, it's kind of a relief. Look, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm not your mom. I'm not your pharmacist or your therapist or your doctor. These videos exist because this stuff is genuinely fascinating, and because the drug iceberg goes so much deeper than most people realize. But if you walked away from today seriously considering experimenting with anything on this list, I would strongly encourage you to reconsider everything except the galantamine. And even then, do your research, read the actual study, and talk to someone who knows more than a guy on the internet who just spent 3 full weeks reading drug forums. To summarize, don't take DIPT unless your dream scenario involves sitting down to listen to your favorite album and experiencing it as a choir of malfunctioning robots for the rest of your natural life. Don't take Pemeline unless you think the ideal outcome of a productivity experiment is a conversation with a liver specialist about transplant options. Don't go anywhere near Bromo Dragonfly under any circumstances, mislabeled or otherwise, because the margin between a normal dose and a fatal one is so thin that calling it a margin is generous. And if for some reason you want to try the one thing on this list that isn't actively trying to end you, galantamine and a lucid dream, set an alarm, take it at 4 in the morning, and try not to spend the whole flight through your dream city just staring in disbelief at how real the ground looks from up there. Trust me, bro,